hot out there, isn't it? Don't worry, we got air conditioning. Come on in, right over here. The chefs will probably want to cool off soon, so we'll sit you here. Enjoy.
Well, hello there.
Hi.
Welcome in.
Welcome to A Minor Diner, where we take a recent music release, give it a theme, and pair it with two other works of art to create a three-course meal. We've got an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert to make our meal du mois, our meal of the month. I am your treble chef, Jesse, and beside me is your bass chef, Zach.
Hello, hello.
We're so happy to have you here. Quick disclaimer before we get started. At any point, if you happen to feel something near your feet, it's very important to move away from the table as fast as possible, or you could lose your toes. So, anyway, it is still pretty hot out there, right?
Wait. Well, what do you mean? What's that disclaimer for?
Okay, so as we know, there's a pond out there where our new parking lot should be.
Because construction hit an aquifer.
Right. Well, not only are there little fishes and turtles in there, but there's actually a big turtle in the pond too. Or at least that's where it used to be. I don't know where he is now.
Wait, how big of a turtle? How big are we talking?
He's like, I don't know, probably like 100 pounds or something.
What the hell are you talking about? There's a 100-pound turtle in the pond?
That's where he used to be.
Wait, how do you know it's a male turtle?
I don't know. He kind of hissed at me in a way that a guy would. He's a brat. You know, like in the locker room, you might...
What kind of turtle weighs 100 pounds? Is he a dinosaur?
No, actually, a Suwanese snapping turtle.
Wait, you looked it up? You Googled that?
Yeah, and then I lost track of him.
You lost track? Where did you see him last?
In the lobby.
You said snapping turtle, right? You brought a 100-pound snapping turtle into a restaurant? What if it bites someone? Liability.
If they feel something by their legs, they'll move away from the table. Hence the disclaimer.
Why would you bring it in here?
I knew you'd freak out about this.
What would possess you to think that bringing a wild animal into our restaurant would be okay?
You know what possessed me? A sense of community. Sure, we have diners come in and out of here all day saying that we're the best thing that ever happened to them. But what do we offer them? What makes our diner different than any other? What kind of culture are we cultivating in here? Unique to us. And then I thought, big turtle. That could be our thing. That's a conversation starter. But I didn't know how fast a bratty adult male Sawanese snapping turtle could move. Sorry. Send me to jail. And if you knew how fast a bratty adult male Sawanese snapping turtle could move, then la-di-da.
Well, it pains me to see this, but I actually kind of see your point. That actually leads pretty naturally to our theme this month. Cultural community. Everyone has a community, but where you were born, where you are currently living, or whatever culture you pretend to be a part of, has a large role in what that community feels like and how its members connect.
We were inspired this month by a delicious masala dosa from New Delhi, India, Lifafa's sophomore album, Superpower 2020. We've paired this downtempo-house album with a 1990 open-air art gallery and a 1923 painting.
And coming to the table right now, our appetizer.
So, for our appetizer this month, we are going to take you to a place that we actually haven't before at A Minor Diner.
Yeah.
To the subcontinent of India. It is a subcontinent, and the Himalayas are quick to remind you of that. So back in the day, a lot of days ago, there was there was a group of people, a community, if you will, known as the Indus River Valley Civilization, and this is where India gets its name, and that is somewhat near Mesopotamia.
Wow. Mesopotamia.
Yes, Mesopotamia. I am making a mess of that Potamia. This is very close to basically the cradle of civilization. And so India, along with China, can kind of claim the throne of, like, we have been here since the start. We are one of
the oldest civilization.
Yes. And so despite that, India has been India doesn't exist really until the later part of the 20th century. Before that, it's the British Raj, and before that, it's various kingdoms. It's never really united. And so the thought of an album about the Indian community, by Indians, for Indians, and about Indians, is a pretty intriguing concept.
Yeah.
Enter
Lifafa. we're now going to the present day. We've skipped a lot of days, and now we're back in 2021. The album is called Superpower 2020. It is the second full length from a man who goes by Lifafa. It's a solo project. His birth name is Surikant Sauni. Sorry if that wasn't perfect. Surikant, if you're listening.
Better than Mesopotamia. So.
So a couple years back in 2019, he released his first full album called Jago, which was fantastic. I really, really like that album. Something that I listened to pretty regularly for the past 2 years. So I was looking forward to this release. And it did not let me down.
Yeah, he was one of those guys that, say what you will about the terrible things that come with an internet algorithm or like who gets famous, who gets popular in whatever sort of ways. But he was ending up on a lot of user-made playlists on Spotify and things, and that really boosted some of his, because his general background is that he is native to India, but then he went to America to be a film student in San Francisco for a little bit. And then he started a jazz band after moving back to India.
Peter Cat Recording Company.
Which is a great name. And they're also pretty good.
They're also pretty good.
Yeah, it's like a very interesting, and you can kind of hear a lot of that in this. So he started Lifafa as an outlet to explore electronic music and more political, social songs. And yeah, it's an interesting, when you get members, because it's becoming more and more common. You used to kind of move to the United States, move to the West, and now you're a Westerner, and that's the way it's going to be. That was a lot of like the 20th century, as mom and dad are first, they're the immigrants, and now I'm first generation British or American, and I'm struggling to whatever. But now a lot of people, we don't have that same sort of brain drain from other countries. They go back. And it's interesting to hear it's somewhat, because, as I've mentioned on, plenty of dishes, that this is a bit political for the sake of the window dressing of being political. But it's interesting to hear one that's like, no, very consciously from the beginning, I'm making a political statement. And so, like it or not, that's what this is. It's not a manifesto. It's not a rant. It's not cashing in on the Times or whatever. It's making a specific political point.
Because that's the thing, is that like a lot of I feel like a lot of political albums or political songs these days, like for example that stupid rap song like "Fuck Donald Trump," right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I wonder what this is about. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, wow, this message is so unclear. Like, I've really got to, decipher this in my mind. But like, unlike something like that, this is definitely a political album, but it doesn't like kind of beat you over the head with it. So, for example, like the intro, which is basically just like ambient noise. The title of the track is August 14th, 1947, which is an auspicious date.
Just a little bit.
Date. Basically, that was the day that India became its own country. Like the independence, India, Pakistan become their own things. And it's been a hell of a ride since then.
Yes. And this is like one of the things that I like about international music is, and I'm sure you'd have the exact same experience, is like having lived abroad. There's this weird tendency as human beings to like kind of cross these two wires in a weird way where maybe before you traveled abroad, it's like, well, everyone is basically the same on planet Earth, and we're all the same, but we just have some differences in culture, but ultimately we're the same. And then you travel somewhere and you realize just how similar we are,
Yep.
but also just how different we are in those cultural differences. And so something like this, like I like the idea of almost this is like the smart, responsible thing to give your friends when they're like, is there any Indian music or whatever? It'd be like this, because like when I lived abroad in China, and you get this perception of China of like, oh, they're all like a bunch of robots over there under the thumb of the government, and there's dragons flying over the mist of the Great Wall, and there's all this sorts of whatever. And it's like, no, they're just exactly like us, and also exactly opposite of us. Like 4,000 years ago, Greece came up with an answer to something, and China came up with a different answer to the same question, and that tree has been growing apart. Same root, but same different branches. And so Lee Fafa opening that album on that very politically charged date, because for those that don't know, Pakistan is part of the Indian Raj when they own it. And then there's this big contentious like, well, we don't want to have India anymore. It's not really a good thing for us to pound our chest that we like defeated evil in the world with Nazism and the Axis, and then like subjugate a couple billion people.
It was suddenly not cool.
Yeah, it wasn't in fashion.
Like, people were, it was a little bit out of fashion by the late 1940s to have these huge colonies.
Yeah, and so they are going to give India its freedom, but the problem with India, and problem is not a negative thing, the issue with India is that it's this very weird subcontinent where it's like you get Indochina, and then you get China, and then you get the Middle East, and you get all these places. And so there isn't just a Muslim population. A significant portion of the country is Muslim, and a significant portion is Hindu, and all sorts of different religions. And so they're trying to figure out how to harmoniously break this country off from its neighbors of like, okay, we're going to get rid of it, but now we can't just have it be this like total collapse of a civilization.
Because as it's gone throughout history, so these places are given independence, lines are drawn on a map, but often the people drawing the lines are not the people who should be drawing the lines, and so we end up with, so what we now think of is like, so somebody who doesn't know much about India might say like, India, it is a country, but like there are the linguistic diversity of India is insane. The religious diversity of India, the borders between India and Pakistan are contested because they were drawn so badly in the first place that they just split communities down the middle. Basically said like, oh, well, you are this now. You are a Pakistani. You are an Indian.
Based on their religion. Like they sort of let it go of like, okay, so if you're this, you're Indian and you go over here. And if you're Muslim, you go up to Pakistan. And it's like, well, I live next to a river 1,000 miles away from Pakistan. Well, that's where the Muslims are going. And we decided that on our little island up here in Northern Europe. This is where you're going. So to open an album on that is a very bold thing to do, I think, but then also like helps set the stage for exactly what you just said. Because people, as you said with the F Donald Trump thing, there's a lot of like talk, because America's like the culturally and economically dominant country in the world right now, that like, well, everyone in the world is kind of like us to some degree, and they're all just, whatever. And so if they have something that we don't have in a bad way, like we should have that, it's like we're so backwards, we're such a backwards country. And then if we have something good, it's almost like, well, we need to export this to them because they definitely want freedom and democracy and whatever the buzzwords are.
Yeah, whatever our idea of freedom and democracy are.
And so then you get to India, and I like India in the 21st century because India is very quick to, beat their chest over the true fact of like, we are the largest democracy in the world, period. Like they say democracy can't work in China for whatever those political reasons are.
That's something to unpack.
Yes, we'll get to that very heavy dish at some point. But India says, actually, we have the second most people in the world, barely trailing behind them. and we make it work despite everything. And they might have their very strict caste system and all of specific Indian problems, but to open an album on like, this is specifically our thing. This is what makes us Indian. This is our 0 hour is once it was founded.
So we're starting from the Big Bang basically of this new country. And between that and the album title, Superpower 2020, which became kind of a meme near the end of the 2010s, I guess I would say. But that term, Superpower 2020, came from a book, kind of came from this book by Abdul Kalam called India 2020, A Vision for the New Millennium. And this was written 20 plus years ago. And basically the main thesis of the statement is that like in the next 20 years, India is going to be the superpower. India is going to be the next big thing. We're not just an up and comer, we are there in the next 20 years. And people liked that message, it turns out. Kalam was actually even voted in as president of the country in 2002. But problem is, didn't really work out.
I was going to say, that's kind of where my headspace was at for 4 years when Trump was there. Is like, I just think this is the darkest day that democracy has ever seen, ever, for sure, definitely, because I've never left the country and I've never read about any other countries. And it's like, do you know anything about Modi? Are you aware of where India is at right now? Because they are a democracy just like we are. They're a democratic republic. And it's a weird, as I'm sure we've all heard, there's these waves that come with COVID that basically whatever your political leanings are is you either choose to advance or retreat your theory of like, this is why we're so backwards, is because everyone else is out having parties in Taiwan and we're not having parties. And now Taiwan is not having parties and we are having parties. But India has been kind of this constant of they have their variant of it, and it is unbelievably hard to control. Whatever they're at, 1.2 or 1.3.
So many billion people. And then they have, for those that don't know, the caste system there is basically America's promise, in quotes or not in quotes, is upward mobility. And so you can take your general social or economic class and advance that, is the theory in America. Whereas India famously has always had, like, you're born into this, you will live as this, you will die as this. And they're kind of addressing it, but it's, again, the Indus River Valley civilization, like, it's kind of deeply ingrained. And so to make a mobile democracy work instantly, like to get rid of COVID and address COVID, he has an interesting statement that India is one of the greatest experiments ever run in the history of humanity, and never has so much been compressed into so little and forced to endure. Meaning this specific 12 months in India, 2020, if you will, I guess. And it's the way in which he chooses, because I guess to get into like sonically the album itself, I love it. It's really
like
good.
It's like that first song, or not the first song, but the
after the
one.
intro, it goes straight into this song called Wahin Ka Wahin. Which is probably top 10 songs of the year for me.
I was gonna say
fantastic.
It might be my favorite, just in a weird, like, once the chorus hits and then that instrumental bit after the chorus, basically, I was like, in that same sort of way, I was like, just like, you know how proud like your ancestors are of you, of like this music, like this is so good. Like in the same way that if someone writes a really great melody and they're from Germany, it's like Beethoven is smiling at you right now. It was like, you did not do this weird Bollywood window trappings, like, general Indian instruments to sell to white people in spas and whatever, CDs of meditation,
like it's
or
not
whatever.
that at all. Like something I like about Lifafa's sound is it's Western. Like the last album that he put out reminded me a lot of like early James Blake kind of stuff. This album a little bit less so. But like there are definitely those Western influences. It's very cinematic, I would say. in a more Western cinematic fashion than like a Bollywood cinematic fashion. But there's definitely like he sings in Hindi, which is a move, and I love that move because it's generally a lot of people, especially like India's a big music culture in a specific sense, but in terms of like quote unquote indie music, I would not classify India as a superpower,
right?
if
yes.
we're keeping this metaphor going. So the easiest thing to do would be to release the album in English, because he speaks English. He's got interviews in English. This is all. This would have been fine, but he's like, nah, fuck you. I'm gonna sing all of this in Hindi, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And there's definitely those like. There are the kind of Indian instrumentation involved. There's some like Bollywood samples involved in both of these albums. Like it has this kind of awesome. You're definitely listening to something from this other country, but it doesn't feel completely unfamiliar to you as well.
Yeah, and it's that way of hitting that without compromising, because that's what I feel like. You've traveled a lot more than I have, but I think we were traveling a lot around the same times. And so you'd go to Europe, you'd go to these places in Asia, and there's like a on-rails experience that they want you to go through, like any other country. Even we do. We want tourists to kind of hop on at the Statue of Liberty, drive through.
We're going to go through Times Square, and you're going to see the billboards, and then you're going to leave.
And then Rushmore, Disney World, Golden Gate Bridge, and now get out. Your visa's up. But there's this weird... Like, I remember when I went to Amsterdam. We actually were in Amsterdam at the same time. I forgot about that. There's a wonderful potato place that you guys have to have. Second best restaurant other than A Minor Diner. I went there twice. I went after you left as well.
It's just a potato restaurant.
Like, anyone that I ever see, friend-wise, that's in Amsterdam, I'm like, there's this potato place. I don't remember where it is, but you'll find it. But I remember getting there, and that was the first time I had ever been to Europe, period. And so I felt like insanely fortunate of like, I'm going to go see Anne Frank's house, and this is such a weird, they fought for their independence against the French, and then they have the English right there and whatever. And I was staying at this hotel near the town center there, and it was great, and it all looked very Dutch. It was cool. And then you take this one corner, and it's this American outdoor shopping mall with H&M and everything. And I was just... if I could spit everywhere, that's all I wanted to do. Because it was like, this is just... Because I had just come from China. And I was like, that's all that China is, too. Is big American Southern California shopping malls and whatever. And there's a way that it's like, no, but it's kind of Chinese or kind of Dutch because we're wearing wooden shoes or we have dragons on everything. And it's like, yeah, but this is clearly just still a tourist thing. Yeah. And so Lee Fafa doing it in this way, like you said, it's this weird, I don't know how he manages to get the percentages just right because it doesn't sound different enough from like the globalized, this is what synthesizers and drum machines sound like in the 2020s, but it sounds very Indian. Yeah. And sort of what I mean about that Trojan horse of like, oh, have you heard any good Indian music that you can recommend to me? Would definitely recommend this because they're going to want this weird, this meditative like nonsense that isn't the real meditative stuff because that's too abrasive and it's not in the correct scale or temperament for them. Like it would just be shopping mall music, spiritual shopping mall music. Whereas this is like pretty confrontational the whole time. Yeah. Like he describes it as like kind of down tempo and it's like riding the edge of down tempo. It's chill, but it's pretty aggressive.
Yeah, it's chilled out while also being... There are some bangers on here. Yeah, it kind of goes back and forth between being very dancey and being almost... there are songs on here that I would describe as down-tempo, almost ballads.
Yeah.
But in a better way than the word ballad.
Well, because like, I guess to wrap it into the theme of the meal here, because like a lot of the lyrical content is either romantic in some sense of like pure individual to individual, or like this communal celebration of what it is to be Indian.
Yeah.
Like, not even so specific if he's not naming landmarks or specific things. He's just saying this sort of love that we can have amongst ourselves, we should have amongst everybody. Like this general sense of, because it's kind of somewhat ambiguous because it's also translated. So it's whatever weird.
So every lyric, I've got some lyrics, but with the caveat that this is Google translated from Hindi, and these could be just horribly wrong. I couldn't find English lyrics.
I don't think they exist yet. Yeah.
Yeah. So we here at A Minor Diner took our translation team to these lyrics, but so they're interesting. You only kind of get snippets of it because I think some is lost in translation and by a bad translation as well.
Yeah.
But like there's cool. Now, country lover, listen up. In your country, love is a crime. And then stuff like, where are the ghosts standing? And will not keep promises. Someone not allowed this land. Green. Let it be here. Shit. And again, I don't know if these are the actual, but like there's a vibe here, and I think it actually sticks pretty well with because I would use the term down tempo because even the dancier tracks are like somber.
Yeah.
Like they're not, this isn't like there are songs that like make me honestly like very happy because they're so well crafted, but there's definitely, it's like this weird kind of mood of like, okay, this is a celebratory album. This is celebrating where we come from and celebrating this community and celebrating the fact that like, yeah, this is one of the biggest experiments on Earth, and there's a lot of things not working about it right now, but we're gonna forge through because we are this. But it's not like, so for example, there is the like India-Pakistan border where they so the Atari Wagah border, where every day they have that military practice, that so the security forces of India and Pakistan have this quote unquote security drill, which is basically just like insane dancing. Like they basically just have like a dance off at this border every day, and like a bunch of people come. Like on the Indian side, everybody's like waving an Indian flag. On the Pakistani side, everybody's like waving a Pakistani flag, and everybody's like, yeah, we are the best, and we're getting along even though we're not really getting along. This is like a brotherly love kind of thing, but it's all like kind of not real, because there's a lot more intense things going on in both of the countries and in their relations with each other. And I feel like this the Lifafa album, while being celebratory, is also very aware that there are problems. Yeah,
that's an interesting just because that's sort of like when we get to like community and trying to break apart that DNA of community, there's this weird inherent like those are both nuclear powers, Pakistan and India, and they know that they can't really do any sort of confrontational stuff on the border because it'll get too aggressive. But there's this, like you say, like maybe we're not even friends. We're brothers, but we just don't like each other. But there's this mutual like, but mom, it's the same mom. We both come from the same mom. Whereas like you get northern India on the border with China, and they have the exact opposite thing where they're like, okay, no one's allowed to carry a gun because if anyone shoots another one, we're going to be in a world war here. Yep. But they do beat the hell out of one another with like primitive weapons up there so that they can't say like, oh, we came like for a fight. They just have clubs and like barbaric like things up there. And it's because they're not of the same family. They're of a different community. And like, I guess it begs somewhat the question because it's a weird, like, let's just use this word, nationalism. There's like this rise in that, and there's this rise in that as a pejorative negative term, that's a nationalist. And I would mostly agree with that because that was World War II. And so it's fine to do that. But there's this tricky like context that actually some of these places are allowed to be nationalist because the country isn't old enough, or they were formed after World War II, and so they are allowed to have this weird, inherently exclusionary mindset that like we are pretty good and we're good because of where we were born and what our ethnicity is. And there's a weird, like, again, I guess because a weird way to address community is that community, the vision you might have in your head is like, well, we all live together, and then there's like this public space, and we decide that, if we all go out there and dig a hole, we can make a pool and then a fountain and a whatever, and like build a school and build a library or whatever. But like a community inherently consists of people that either you might not agree with or that do the wrong thing. And Lifafa himself has been kind of, he's got this wonderful album that's great all the way through and is about like India. We should be, happy to be India, even though we're experiencing COVID in this way. We're Indian. There's this guy, Hashback Hashish, who was featured on the last track on the album. And the last track is this great, like 13-minute, pretty.
It's the biggest swing, I guess you could say, on the album, because it gets a lot weirder than the rest of the album in terms of like production decisions made. Yeah,
it's bold, and it takes some like a defiant, like this is the ending statement of the album, and so it's applause for that. But then this Hashback Hashish guy has gotten in trouble for, you guessed it, like what everyone is getting in trouble for post Me Too is that he was abusive and.
Turns out he's a piece of shit.
Yes. And so this is one of my favorite things of like, I like when people make very bold statements, either just in negativity or positivity, and then just never embrace for like a counter argument ever. And so there's a lot of that nowadays with England thinks that they are the only country experiencing the failures of democracy, or white people this, or America's the only one. Oh, our republic is in turmoil and we're collapsing, and men are this, or women are this. And then it's like, so what do you think of India? Oh, well, India, they have elephants and the Taj Mahal, and they're like a magical place in a storybook. The Jungle Book is in India, written by a British guy. But then you get stuff like this, and it's like, no, they're very public about this guy did this. All of the Instagram comments are saying everything that young women here would be saying. All of the men are condemning his actions as well as somewhat Lifafa's, because that's, I guess, a question I would pose to you, and not in such a specific way, but like Lifafa's stance was, we did that song before any of
this came out. I didn't know about any of this, but I wanted to release the song, because it's mostly my work and I'm proud of it, and B, I wanted to give this guy credit for it because he helped me with it. So releases this song. It's actually, if I'm not mistaken, the first single off the album,
13-minute
music video.
Music video.
And it comes back to bite him a little bit, because that statement is not met completely with applause.
And so it becomes one of these weird things. I think it's the subject of some movies or books where it's like, okay, like I can condemn or praise his action in doing that, but I find it very, very arrogant or even pretentious or just childish to condemn at least his sense of ethics, because there isn't an ethical action that he can take in that moment, I guess, other than not releasing the song. But that becomes a weird when it comes to community. It's like, okay, well, this guy did this thing. Like, for example, there are a lot of Germans, and then all of a sudden 10 years later, a lot of those Germans are doing weird things with the government. And so it becomes, we grew up together in school. Are you going to condemn me for playing whatever, what are they, hopscotch or whatever, or like Foursquare, whatever they're playing in Berlin in the 20s,
I'm losing you here.
Yes,
Come
exactly.
back.
Yes. Well, because it's like, I didn't know any of this, and I created this thing that I feel very proud of. I feel that I am expressing my humanity, and this is what I want as an artist. And so if someone else is involved in that, is that my my responsibility. Like you get the Woody Allen thing. Everyone's like, well, there's a lot of production designers and gaffers and cinematographers and actors and all that on those movies.
Yep.
At the moment, sure, you decide to buy that or stream that. He is pocketing some percentage of that money. So I understand like a lifetime, well, we're going to boycott this until whenever. But like someone 200 years ago, we find out that Edgar Allan Poe did this or that. And it's like, well, but at that point, it's a little bit removed.
Yeah.
And so when you get Lifafa doing this, I find it's one of these inherent like community. Great. Community is wonderful, and that's why civilization has worked. But then I guess your take on moments like this, where there's not a way for him to win because he's either extinguishing his inner flame, or if he releases it while not crediting that guy, if that comes out, that's 10 times worse. If it doesn't come out, it's unethical because he's taking credit for work that wasn't his. If he does just release it and say, it is featuring Bill Cosby, like I didn't know, it's 2010, I didn't know. It's like, I guess the trappings and the follies that can come with community. I think that he has this interesting take on India in general, but I guess your opinion on when you pour the subject matter, the ethos of the album is this thing, and then you accidentally get one of the negative aspects of that thing. Where do you go with that?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's too big of a question to answer just like this, but it reminds me of a lot of, so for example, like the EDM community is all about this love and, you know, we're just a big family. And then what's his name? Bass Boy
69, yeah.
yeah, Bass Boy 69. Bass Nectar, Bass Hunter. I always get the two confused.
Yeah.
Bass Nectar, I think, comes out as like a complete sexual predator piece of shit, taking advantage of his role in this community, basically. And it's happened again and again that there are these cultural communities, whether it be like an EDM culture or we'll say Indian culture or American culture or whatever, that like you feel at home here. But the problem with that is when you feel at home here, there are some people that are going to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
Right? And so it almost in like a very unintentional way sticks with this theme that we're talking about with this cultural community. And this was not Lifafa's intention. I almost guarantee it. But like kind of gets to the core of community and the fact that community is this wonderful, wonderful thing that we all need, but it's something that is very easily taken advantage of and very easily torn apart. So like, I don't know. So for example, and this is not, I'm not saying this as like, this is an Indian problem.
Yeah.
Because, the Thomson Reuters Foundation in 2018 had this huge survey of a bunch of experts of women's issues, and this foundation found India to be, quote, the most dangerous nation for sexual violence against women, as well as human trafficking for domestic work, forced labor, forced marriage, and sexual slavery, among other reasons. And again, I'm not saying this is just an Indian problem, because guess what the only Western country in the top 10 was? It's the United States.
I thought it was going to be Luxembourg. Yeah.
But so similarly here, right? There's this community. We want to be proud of the country we're from, because there's a difference between pride and nationalism, right?
Yeah.
In my opinion. And so we want to be proud of this place, but look, we've got these horrific problems right now that we have to deal with. And I think this as like a wrapping up point, I suppose. I think the like very somber yet celebratory tone of the album really, I guess, hits home that dichotomy that it's like we are proud, but there are problems. And I think it hits such an interesting tone that I think that's one of the most one of the most noteworthy things about this album is it's like it hits that tone perfectly, and I really like it for it.
Yeah, I would posit exactly the same thing, that in all of its almost inherent positive qualities of like what he chooses to do, he's taking all these disparate sounds that shouldn't really be cohesive, making them cohesive. Great metaphor for like, India can be what it was 4,000 years ago and what it was yesterday and what it will be tomorrow, and it'll sound something like this, and that's wonderful. And then even in this unfortunate, negative, unforeseen side, it also plays into, but even if someone in that community or a part of that community needs to be addressed, that is part of community, and this is how we're going to try to figure out these ethical quandaries. And so I think, as far as as like we've said, it's down-tempo, but it's also not. And I think you could describe community as a whole in that sort of way. A Minor Diner would not be possible without our sponsors. This month, we are proud to partner with Hikiko no Mori. Let's be real. You have no friends. You think you do, but when was the last time you saw David? And what about Laura? Do you still talk to Laura? The answer is no. We know. It happens. And it's okay. Luckily, Hikiko no Mori is always there for you. We help to make a community for those who have none. All we ask for is your zip code. Based on your location, we show you a list of anyone nearby who is also lonely. Sort through pages of people's names, people just like you. Or RSVP for one of our local events. They happen every day. They definitely happen near you. People will show up. Don't worry. We have a lot of users. It doesn't matter where you are. Just, please, go outside. There's people waiting for you. You're worthy of love. We can't all be alone like this. The only way the society thing works is if we talk to each other. Please join today. Hikiko no Mori, connecting you with anyone. At all.
This summer, it's a family reunion at the American Music Festival. August 27th, come down to City Park for the community event of the year. At the door, everyone receives a pulled pork sandwich with a side of cornbread and collard greens. After a nice meal, head on over to the drag tent and see our fabulous queens strut their stuff before watching hardcore punk legends Ahogarse en la Sangre de Cristo play alongside Bunt. Mosh hard in our mud pits and then relax between sets with thought-provoking TED Talks from former Secretary of Education Rod Page and TikTok personality JoJo Siwa. Be sure to get there early because parking is sure to fill up quickly and tickets are definitely going to go fast. Ignite an unforgettable spark with your community at American Music Festival.
Here at A Minor Diner, sometimes we like to experiment with a bit more dangerous dishes. And for this entree, we have a Brazilian fugu, which is, for those that for some reason don't know, pufferfish, poisonous pufferfish, that if you eat the wrong parts, you will die. And this happened as recently in Brazil as 2014, so we're, stay vigilant here. But I mean this to say that this is a very dangerous dish, and we will tread lightly and tread accordingly. But one that I feel represents what community means post-industrial revolution, like what it means to struggle for your individuality while establishing a national identity. So, in the late 1800s, a young artist was born named Tarsila do Amaral. And in Brazil, all you have to say is Tarsila, and they know exactly who you're talking about. Yep. She is credited with inventing modern art in Brazil and responsible for helping develop Brazil's sense of national identity. Mm-hmm. She's kind of their Picasso, their figure. Again, at the late end of the 1800s is when she's born, so she's mostly active in the 20th century. But Brazil, before World War II, really doesn't have like a sense of national identity. They used to be this Portuguese empire, and then even the coup that made them a republic. People didn't even realize anything had happened. Like, it was this kind of just like, okay, new people are in charge, and now we're a republic, whatever that means.
It's also an interesting country in similar ways as India is, in that, like, we have what we know of as Brazil, but a lot of Brazil is like rainforest. There's still like undiscovered tribes that are just living deep in the forest of Brazil.
Exactly. And we just see Carnival on the beaches of Rio
Exactly.
with Cristo de Redentor, or whatever his name is, Jesus on the mountain there. And they play soccer, and that's it. That's Brazil.
That's Brazil. Yep, we got
and
it.
Also, all of South America is Brazil. So Tarsila do Amaral goes to Paris when she's a young woman and studies there for a few months. And this is, again, at like the perfect time to be studying painting in Paris in the early 20th century. She's learning so much from many masters. And she wrote in letters back home that she felt increasingly Brazilian in this moment. And I can relate to that because when you're an American, you're kind of like, okay, well, I'm this person and I'm this individual, whatever. But I'm sure maybe you felt the same way living abroad. Like, you're like, okay, this is what it means to be American.
It was kind of funny because I wrote out this big like paragraph about like my feelings towards America as I was like doing research for the Lafafa portion of this meal, right? Mm-hmm. And basically the paragraph was about, like, I basically have no love lost towards America in general, but when I was living abroad, that's actually the closest I felt more connected to American culture. I felt prouder to be an American while I was abroad, and I don't know, it was more interesting. It was interesting that I felt more in tune with being an American the longer I was not in America. And I wrote all this out, and then I started doing research for the Tarsila portion. And I was like, damn it, she had an interview that said exactly the same thing.
100 years earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, I am so clever and heartfelt and just thinking things that nobody's ever thought.
Yeah.
But it turns out that's never true.
And then, yes, exactly, because Mark Twain had a book, The Innocents Abroad, where he and a bunch of Americans, it's a nonfiction book, they're this trip to England or to Europe and then to the Middle East, and that's basically what it is. Of like, everyone's so backwards here, and everyone's so weird, and like all these foreigners here or whatever. But it's like supposed to be somewhat satirical in that way of discovering. Oh, I guess by seeing what we're not, I see what Americans are.
Gotcha.
In the exact same way, yeah. Like when I was in China. It's like, yeah, I'm not too thrilled with the fact that the CIA probably killed Martin Luther King. By probably, I mean with a very bold underline on that. But then I go over there and I'm like, yeah, we did help you guys with the Air Force in World War II against the Japanese. We're best friends, America and China. But anyway, yes, Tarsila goes over there, feels increasingly Brazilian, and then comes back saying, I want to be the painter of my country.
Yeah.
And so one of her first paintings that she chooses to do, and there's half of this that I think is so beautiful, and then there's half of this that just gets me high because I love when people just like boldly walk into like naive moves. Mm-hmm. She paints this painting titled A Negra, the Black Woman. Mm-hmm. And now the chefs start sweating profusely serving this dish to you.
Yeah, luckily you can't feel the heat in here because it's getting there. The painting is believed to be modeled on a woman who worked for... So Tarsila's family was a plantation-owning family. So the painting is based on this kind of slave woman that lived with the family.
Yes, because Brazil did not abolish slavery until they became a country, basically, because they were Portuguese Empire. And then in 1888, which was 2 years after she was born. So her dad is a wealthy plantation owner in Sao Paulo, and she grows up living a certain way. and she's only able to go to Europe because she's of a certain affluence. And that's not to take away from the actual accomplishment that it is, because she's coming from a place with no artistic community, period. And she is a young woman saying, like, I'm going to do this. And powers her way through it, because as you can expect, they're not just going to let some young woman say, this is what Brazil is, and tell the rest of the world this is what Brazil is. She herself even acknowledged the painting is very controversial and only exhibited it twice in her lifetime. So the painting, what happens with painting essentially in the 20th century is that you invent cameras. And so the need for lifelike or truly accurate, like true to life,
diminishes.
Yes, significantly. Of like, we don't care about this whatsoever anymore. And so that's why you get like Picasso, and that's even why Van Gogh like remains so good or remains so renowned, is he was doing all of this before that, but he was just having this that's why it didn't sell that well when he was alive. This sort of abstract, symbolic sense of human nature. So she paints the black woman, and the features, why it's controversial is because in the West, anyone who is even remotely different than you're going to paint them with very exaggerated features of like a caricature in a very derogatory way. But this is also her general style. Like, she's got that Picasso. Things are going to be insanely exaggerated and just not even randomly, but for symbolic effect to some degree. And so this woman is depicted, the background is very abstract, but she's against like a tree, basically taking a break. And you get like, she's got like one breast, but then her arms and her shoulders and her general body are like huge compared to her head. And then her legs alone are like a third of her entire body mass. And she does not look too pleased to be there, which is, I'm glad that she chose to depict her in that way and not.
She not like a mammy stereotype there.
Exactly.
But in terms of physical stereotypes, this checks a lot of the boxes.
Yes, but then why? Like, it's sort of this argument of throwing the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to historical pieces that don't quite fit the modern day sensibilities, whether that's a cartoon or a painting or a story. The context, like, it is even she is aware that this is not a very good depiction of someone who is going through something both on an individual level and then the ethnicity that she belongs to. It is not her place to like depict this sort of scenario. But the actual like historical context is that this is a huge like rock in the window of like old white European men dictating what is beautiful and what is art, because this is essentially in the artistic world, in the what I should say is like the painting world, what's known as like a bath scene. And so like the old Greek, Roman, like here's a bunch of young naked women in a marble bath bathing. This is like what civilization is. And so Tarsila says like, these are all a lot of beautiful baths you have here in Europe. I wonder who made those baths, because I don't think it was those young white 20-year-old women. And it's sort of this question that the painting asked, like, do you have the stomach to view this? Because this is, I mean, obviously she painted it a bit naively, like she admits it herself. But then I think that the painting does hold value and that is still worth something, because it's not a 1920s, 30s like blackface or like Aunt Jemima sort of like caricature, offensive way of like subjugating people through whatever you want to call that, cultural whatever. It's like, do you have the stomach to look at this? Because this is a very, in the same way that Picasso is a bit eerie to look at, the way that he paints things. It's like, this is what humans look like on the inside if you turn them inside out. And this is that sort of thing of like, this is not my place to do this, because I am the daughter of a plantation owner who now gets to be a painter, like a very affluent lifestyle. But is this not Brazil? Is this not
Yeah.
what we're doing?
Exactly.
It's a lot of pretty pastel colors, but all adding up to what, basically? And so when it comes to, I guess, defining community,
Yep.
it's a little bit, especially as Americans, I think we have this, well, I'll give you one anecdote here. When I was over in China, you get a little bit spoiled because I was in not the western part of China, western in the metaphorical sense, not the literal geography, but like the whitewashed touristy side. I was living in like the least popular of the 4 sectors there. And so you get used to being like the American, and then people, you walk into places and the printer is happy to see you, and the people at the convenience store are happy to see you. And then whenever I would see like another white person, I would get this weird sort of like, probably like dogs do on the street of like, I don't know if you're my friend or if you're like a weird guy, because there's a lot of pieces of crap in China.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of genuinely terrible human beings that are all Americans, Australians, or Europeans. Like,
Just like they have found a way to escape their real life in this fake Asian life.
Yes.
Because it's very similar in Vietnam. There are some, when I lived over there, a lot of people I would meet are like, wow, you are a garbage human.
Exactly.
There's nothing good about you.
It's the weird stereotype of like, I think you use it as a punchline, like Thailand. It's like, where are you going? Why are you going to Thailand? But that's like Korea, Japan, China, Vietnam don't have that same stereotype, where they should, of like, there's a lot of people going over there and they sort of get carried around as if the pharaoh would, metaphorically. But then there would be these times, because I grew up in Colorado, and Colorado's cool and great and fine in whatever sort of way, but in the same way that people have this issue with like, there's a lot of American flags everywhere in America. Growing up in Colorado, I was like, this is like a state that's the shape of a square, and yet everyone loves flying this flag of like, I'm so happy to be a Coloradan, this arbitrarily defined border that's kind of cool because the rivers next to the mountains or whatever. I love Colorado, but it's this weird like, well, I'm a Coloradan, and that's
I wear the flag on my t-shirt.
Yes, exactly. And so I remember being over there in Beijing, and like, I don't think it was Tiananmen Square, but it was somewhere near Forbidden City, and just seeing like, that's where I would see Colorado flag t-shirts. And I would like kind of register that of like, okay, yeah. And then remember, oh wait, I'm like 8,000 miles away from home. Go back where you came from, Colorado. And like, well, this is such a stupid point of pride. And so why I bring that up is like, I shed a lot of my American habits over there, and not a negative or positive way, just, you know, when in Rome, like you it makes sense to behave a certain way or certain cultural norms. But I find it very interesting. I can relate to Tarsila in this sort of way of like, there's this argument, why do we keep making movies about slavery, or keep making like civil rights movies, or like, are we ever going to be able to move on beyond past this, or Nazi movies or whatever, of like, we keep banging the same sort of drums. I find it very admirable that she chose to, I mean, again, naively, she didn't know that she was going to do this. So it's weird to admire someone for being naive in this moment, but to develop her style that almost she didn't put on that block. Like, okay, well, I guess there wasn't as much stigma back then against like the wealthy being artists, but she chose to depict not mom, not dad, not like a sunset. She has a lot of beautiful paintings that really do truly define Brazil later. But like that she chose to start on this one as like, we are, because people forget like, oh, America's this, whatever. It's like Brazil is down there too. Like they are just exactly what we are in every sort of way. They have a native population that was violently pushed back. And I find it almost a necessity, in the same way that you can't have life without death or good without bad in an arbitrary, everything has to have balance. I think that she brings an interesting point to community that is almost like a Parks and Rec scene, where it's like, it's so great that we all live like Colorado. Like basically that's what I would do, is I would go like, it's great that we all care about the environment and the rivers are clean and we have the best water in the country, this and that. And then you go down the table and here's the designated person, like the Debbie Downer of like, and what are we doing wrong? And I think that her doing that is a necessary component of community that I think is overlooked in the art world.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. It's it's interesting too. Yeah, so this is one of her earlier pieces, and I feel like there's so many different conversations you could have with this piece. But then, as a whole, Tarsila's paintings kind of became the start of a Brazilian art movement that they called. I'm gonna massacre that. I think it's pronounced anthropophagia. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Which so basically that anthropophagus, eating humans, so cannibalism. And this is a kind of like cultural cannibalism where so Brazilian artists consuming some qualities of other cultures in order to create this kind of Brazilian identity, this Brazilianness, which I think is super interesting. We have a lot of conversations these days about cultural appropriation and what is and what is not okay to quote unquote appropriate from other cultures. But I find her work very interesting in this way, that there is this kind of, European modernism, like you were bringing up Van Gogh earlier, like it's definitely of its time in terms of art, but then we are also we're taking everything else, but then we're making it uniquely Brazilian, and this is what our community is, and like is it completely okay, or is it cultural appropriation? It's kind of vague.
Yeah.
But this is, I don't know. It's interesting because we all have this cultural community, and they're pretty distinct cultural communities, but all of these communities overlap in kind of different ways as well.
Yeah. There's like because it's why. Not in an offensive way, hopefully, but we'll see where this goes.
I'm
but
sweating.
Yes,
again.
Exactly. Already, there's always. I'm not saying this is like a positive aspect of myself by any means, but like whenever a country is a bit too aggressive towards your country, like even just an individual member. Oh, I'm from country X, and you're an American, right? So what's the deal with Donald Trump? Mm-hmm. It's like it's so diffused from my responsibility, that man. So like, don't hold me to that.
Yeah. There
is this point of pride that I think everyone west of the Prime Meridian should have, that this is what the actual world is that we are a multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious society. Like, yes, India is, but India is such an exception to that rule because of their geography. Whereas like anytime anyone, I guess over the last like 5 years, especially with our politics, like is French or German or whatever, and like, oh, what's going on in America? Yep. It's like, yeah, I don't know. Like we just don't have a racially homogenized society. It's so weird that we're disagreeing on everything all the time. I think that's beautiful, but yes. But yeah, like community in the way that she chooses to, I guess to both of our points a little bit here. Her work was displayed, I think, not maybe for the very first time in America, but the most prominent time was in MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York back in 2018. And it posed this question because Brazilians were outrageously like excited about it. Yeah, they were, but it raised this question of like that you don't seem to think of. Like in America, we have our hot button racial issues. But Brazilians have this very quiet issue in America, at least, or in the West at least, that they try to stay as under the radar as possible because it's very complicated for them to define their identities. Because I was reading this article, and it was about Tarsila, but how like Brazilians approach Tarsila today. A Brazilian, probably the most famous Brazilian at the moment, probably not so much anymore, is whatever her last name is, but Gisele Bündchen or whatever, the supermodel, the Tom Brady's wife. Oh. She's Brazilian. Is she like Brazilian with a capital B? Because she is Brazilian, and her family's Brazilian for however many generations, whatever. But there's this weird thing, like people like her and people emigrating to the United States, there's a census question, what's your ethnicity? Mm-hmm. And are Brazilians Latinx or are they Hispanic? And they're like, we are unbelievably neither of those. Like that does not fit us at all. We're not Latin American, and we're not of Spanish conquest in that sort of way. And it begs this question of like, but they don't like to say that. They say like, whenever someone says, are you Latino or Latina? They say yes. And they're just like, I don't want to talk about it. And I'm not speaking on behalf of this monolith, but they were at least 3 years ago talking about this in relation to Tarsila, because Tarsila herself is lighter skinned. She's not darker. She comes from an affluent family that presumably had been in power for however long. And so there's this sense of community that I feel that her and her work, especially when it comes to like the cannibalistic side of it, because she's got another famous one that's, it feels like morbid to look at, and she defines it as like being very cannibalistic with this guy with this little head and big feet and big body, as if he's consumed everything. And I think there's something like, in the United States, there's no reason to ever praise Manifest Destiny.
No.
But in this alternate timeline, she almost is doing that in Brazil, of like, this is the way to artistically depict what happened here, because we can condemn it all we want. We still live here. Like, this is still 200 years later, this is what it is. But it's not glorifying it or condemning it or whatever. It's like, this is just this brutally unfortunate thing that happened. But here is a like abstract, almost like, I imagine like people, not even people, extraterrestrials, 4,000 or a billion years from now, whatever you want to say, like finding that art. And it feels like almost like us looking at hieroglyphics, where it's like, what do you think the cat means? And what does the bird head mean, or whatever? Yeah. And I think her way of depicting this, because I think I've raised my issues with postmodernism before, I think modernism does the best job of depicting these things. So it's got one hand on the tangible meaning and then one hand on like, but you get the metaphor, right?
Totally. Yeah. It's the like the surrealistic nature of it actually bringing out the meaning, as opposed to like postmodernism, which the surrealism is almost supposed to like destroy the meaning a little bit. But yeah, in a similar, there's another Tarsila work called Workers from 1933, which is basically, there's about 2/3 of the painting is just like people's faces, like kind of very somberly, of different colors, like a very multicultural looking mass of people. But they all look very similarly distraught, I guess. And then the other 1/3 of it is like just a factory in the background. And kind of in a similar way, it's like, oh, well, you know, this is the way that we are going to portray this. And this is not, we're not making like this negative or positive. It's relatively negative.
Yes.
But we're not coming out and saying this. You're supposed to get this from this almost surreal, because it's an unnerving photo, like an unnerving painting to look at, in the same way that the one that you brought up was. And the dish at the heart of this conversation is, it's kind of like bringing up these, in the same way that Lifafa album does, kind of bringing up the problems of this community while also presenting kind of what the community actually is, I suppose. Yeah,
and like that painting in particular is, I find, I'm going to 3-point thing I'm about to say here, so forgive me if I forget and then add 18 more. But I find that one very... not wholesome, but like I find that to be a very good artistic, like display of artistic growth with her, because she is the daughter of a slave owner. And I'm pretty sure that painting is inspired by one of her trips to the Soviet Union. And she was seeing people there. And exactly like you said, I'm not condemning nor praising it, because I think she was actually somewhat in favor of that brand of socialism.
Yeah, because it's very similar to a lot of kind of like socialist art of the same time period.
Yeah, and so it's this like this actual depiction of actual life, not romanticized nor condemned. That when it comes to community, because ultimately an artist is only as good as their community, because a community has to rally around and protect and nurture their artists. And so you have a figure like one of my all-time favorite historical figures like very like read his book all the time, look up to him in the ways that you can. Malcolm X. Like Malcolm X is allowed to be Malcolm X because he's not like outright insanely praised or condemned at each stage of his life, and he gets to live 4 different lives and like have these big emotional and character arcs in terms of what he believes. He goes to Mecca and he's like, oh, it's not like white people in general. It's like American government, white people in charge, because I'm seeing way too many other, like Muslims in America at that time aren't indicative of Muslims all over the world in the same way that whoever my enemies in America might be aren't my enemies abroad. And you get like, when I think of things like this, like this painting of Tarsila's, there's this wonderful movie, if you've seen it, Bamboozled, Spike Lee's Bamboozled.
I know of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very like I would encourage any and every diner to watch it because it's like this comedy that they're like, actually the ratings at this failing TV station or whatever, they would be boosted if we did another like minstrel show, like blackface kind of thing, and it's in like 2002. It's not like some weird arbitrary time later. It's in 2002. And it's like, you're aware of how off that is, and it still keeps being played in this way, but it gets more and more dramatic as it goes. And the ending credits in that movie are very beautiful because he doesn't do it sarcastically. He displays all of the old merchandise of like very offensive how we used to portray African Americans in the 1800s all the way to the 1950s, and all the toys and posters and weird ways. And he's got this nice music under it of like, okay, this happened and this was objectively bad, but it's part of the genetic makeup of the country. And so like, don't destroy it, put it in a museum of like, these are these relics of hate and subjugation and bigotry, but they are still artistic works nonetheless, in the same way that when people go to Rome and it's like, oh, it's so beautiful and I wish we could have this in America. And it's like, yeah, and it's all built by slaves for hundreds of years. Yep. And so be very careful with that. I find that Tarsila's work, in addition to just being like what you might want to see of Brazil, pieces like this are so important to keep around and to not display too often and not too boldly and not too proudly. But like, this was Brazil in the 1920s. They're not much better. Like nothing, like they're still subjugated citizens. They might not be slaves, but this is what we have to deal with. And I'm not going to glorify or romanticize it. But if we are going to have a community, then people who are, people in that community will be inviting themselves to it that I don't necessarily get to dictate. So how do we all navigate this together?
So for our dessert, we've kind of brought a dish that I think has an interesting look at culture and community. A lot of the reason that it's interesting is because of where it is. So this work of art is based in Berlin. And Berlin, now it's one of the most international cities of the world. I mean, there's people from all over that are moving there to work, make techno music, just spend decades of their life in a rave. But Berlin is actually, I mean, like throughout history, one of the most fascinating cases of having like very different, distinct cultural communities because so it was the capital of the Margraviate of Brandenburg for almost 3 years. It was the capital of the Kingdom of Prussia for 200 years, the German Empire for 40 years, the Weimar Republic for 20, the Third Reich for 12, and then it was just split into 2 different countries. There was West Berlin, which was part of West Germany. It wasn't actually the capital. They moved the capital to Bonn when it was West Germany. But East Berlin was the capital of East Germany, which was obviously the communist part. It's served as a city of propaganda in the time of Hitler and the Nazis. So there's some of these spectacular, just way too large, way too ornate buildings that were like monuments of Nazi power. And then like the split of this city was very much the symbol between the split of the First World and the Third World after World War II. And now the city, I think, almost symbolizes the cultural community of Europe as a whole, as a place with like open borders and a kind of European quote unquote character over a German one or a Spanish one or a Czech one or whatever. But the dish specifically that we are bringing to the table is the East Side Gallery. This is the largest outdoor open air art gallery in the entire world. So basically, we know about the Berlin Wall.
Yep.
The Berlin Wall falls in 1989, so we kind of think of the just like we think of the Great Wall of China as kind of this like large monolith, right? But like nowadays, there's different parts of the Great Wall that still exist, and a lot of it doesn't. And it was the same thing with the Berlin Wall. Like it wasn't just one long wall; there were multiple sections of it. But this one section, they had. Leading this project was a young artist from Iran named Kani Alavi, and he led 118 artists from 21 countries to decorate the east side of one of the parts of the wall. The west side, the part that was in West Germany, was covered with graffiti and just like a normal like. Because they had a little bit more freedom to do things like that on that side. But the east side was off limits to citizens. So that was the side that all these artists painted on. So it was 118 artists who all kind of designed a mural that symbolized the opening back up of this city and like coming back together as a community.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel that that's a word that maybe I'm using too much in general in life, so I won't say that. But like, yeah, the Berlin Wall, as you mentioned, you know, the Great Wall of China isn't one giant wall, and that's there for this like explicitly defensive purpose of keeping out the northern invaders. But then this is almost exclusively a political wall of we didn't want to continue World War II, where it's the Allies versus the USSR. So we're just going to do this. We're going to put this here very arbitrarily, too, of just like split this place. The place we were fighting, we've now decided this is now split. And like you're saying, for those that don't know, Berlin is like solely in East Germany. And then there's just this enclave chunk that's like the West still wants to keep this west half of the city, even though it's completely surrounded. And that's an interesting, like the way that you describe Germany, because I think that that's a thing that young people don't quite realize. Like back in the day, you could get, I think we were probably the very tail end of that. If things were manufactured somewhere, I remember very early childhood, like made in West Germany or made in East Germany, and maps getting phased out of school. Yeah. Because that was 1989 that it fell, but it still took a while to phase that out.
You get a lot of old globes.
Yes, exactly. And so it's a weird, I'm glad you mentioned that about like Berlin being this like focal point of so many different places, because Germany doesn't really, you can't like project the same like European power or even like modern country standards onto it ever. Because like, I think if this is 89, so that's 30 years ago, basically this is like kind of the longest time Germany hasn't had like a big problem since like Otto von Bismarck when he founded it back in the 1880s. Because it was like, imagine the reverse of the United States, where we make a country, split it into states. After the 13 colonies, you're doing state by state. But yeah, Germany is like, what if we combined all of these very small, inconsequential Western, Eastern European states because of the breakup of the Holy Roman Empire into this? And so like, what is your cultural community in Berlin versus Dresden versus anywhere? And then to have, I think Berlin is defined now by this wall. They might have their skyline, but that skyline's not as old as other cities because it was all blown to hell in the 40s. Nothing exists. And so I think it's an inspiring thing to repurpose the wall in this sort of way. But I guess I would ask you, this is now the third instance in this meal, where you have a federal government, where it's like there are states, and so therefore local issues stay local issues, and only certain issues stay, centralized. Like the fact that the wall was even built is like the result of like a centralized government.
Yeah.
But then now the state that it's currently in, because it's not by any means in complete disarray, but it's hard to manage
Totally.
the world's largest open air gallery. It's like only that way because there isn't this strong German government saying this is now mandatorily a preserved heritage site or something like that. How did you feel? Because in looking at this dish and looking through some of the murals, because they're all about the same dimensions, they give each artist kind of a chunk of the wall. I was both very moved of like this spirit of humanity and this like general what it must have felt like in '89, that anything is possible and we can tear down pointless political barriers. And then the other half was like, a lot of this is like Hallmark greeting card sort of art. Like this is like I don't know what this person. I respect that this is a very multicultural effort, but like I would have almost preferred if they kept it German. Of like, what did this? Because there's like a movie that this kind of barely features in, Goodbye Lenin, and it's a movie where this young East and West Berlin are split, and then his mom falls into a coma, and then she wakes up after the fall, but she's still like, she liked living in East Germany, so he's trying to preserve this, like, the Russians still whatever, blah blah, and he like keeps her in the apartment in that way. And it's like kind of weird. I feel that it's a weird like co-opting of like, this is like when people give the credit to Reagan for the wall. It's like, well, it's just leave it in Germany. It's like a German-Russian issue. We don't need to quite take credit for this. But when it comes to like you bringing this to the table in terms of community, I'm curious of your thoughts on like mainly that word, like keep tying culture and community together with this on this canvas.
Well, so the reason that I think that this East Side Gallery is so interesting and the reason that it's on our table today is that like I think it really shows how fragile and frail these communities can be and how easily that culture and that community can change, right? So Berlin as a city has meant so many different things. Like I said, it was a symbol of power to the Nazis, but then it became a symbol of something completely different after it was split. It was the symbol of kind of like what we perceived as like the largest split between the world, right? We have, the democracies and we've got the communists on the other side, right? And we like physically, literally built a barrier between these two worlds, but also ideologically where it was building this massive wall between these two different communities, these two different cultures, quote unquote. And the East Side Gallery to me is people kind of trying to reckon through the union of these two worlds again. And so you're seeing a lot of optimism. You're seeing a lot of like, okay, we can smash borders, like we're not all that different. We're coming together as a giant community, as opposed to like tearing us apart through ideology or country borders or whatever. And it was all idealistic because in the end, I mean, nothing really changed. I mean, Berlin, the city changed, the Soviet Union fell and dispersed into 20 plus different countries or whatever. But I mean, there's still border wars going on today. There's still all of this going on. One of the more famous murals is from Günter Schaefer, who the piece is called Fatherland or Vaterland, and it's the part of the Israeli flag superimposed onto the German flag. And, that's interesting these days because Israel has its own kind of conflicts regarding regarding what is and isn't theirs to take land-wise. But I feel like it's interesting because it's all of these different artists that are depicting this like becoming a larger community in different ways. And I do agree that some of it is just wall art. Some of it is not particularly interesting. But
because I would, I guess, pose that to you as well, that all art and culture should be preserved because it's like it's something that validates the existence and the emotions and the histories of people. But then also art itself is this weird, futile, like, attempt to like bring meaning to lives or to like political actions or cultural actions or whatever. It's like a weird, I've found it to be, because I wrote a screenplay in film school. Like you'd have to come up with a concept, and I think it was for a film, but it was for the TV class. And it was weird. Like, I'm not part of the generation that really saw this. I wasn't even alive in 1989, but was fascinated by it and saw enough like historical value in it. But it like loses a tremendous amount of relevance every day in the way that it just wouldn't register. I'm trying to think of another comparison of like in Spain with like Franco and the fascists, and that being so different than the Republic. It's like that was the biggest deal in the world for like 70 years.
Yeah, and now nobody ever talks
yeah,
about it.
It doesn't really exist in that way.
Spain is just a beach.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's just Ibiza and like in these like EDM songs. Yes. Yeah, and so it's like if the wall were to go away forever, like not be maintained, because that's a general problem, is that this is outdoor.
It's starting to fall apart. I mean, it was all remodeled, the word you would use, repainted, because it was by the end of the 2000s. It was not looking so good. It was not looking so hot. So they've repainted a lot of. I mean, I don't think there's any of like the original murals left. It's all like refurbished versions of them, but still the same concepts. None of them were like, I think only one of them or something was painted over in favor of a new mural. But
because it's like a weird, like we go back to the Brazilian argument of like, what is Brazil? And Brazil will be this constantly changing thing, like India. India doesn't need to be looked at like it's the 1830s and they're owned by the Raj and they're going to choose and forge their own destiny. When I was looking at some of these pieces, like it reminds me just of current era political art of like, well, because this guy, the Secretary of Education, like this guy, we're all going to know this guy in 15, 16 years. Yep. Like this is like, because there's this famous one of these two guys kissing. The guy, to boil it down, the guy in charge of the Soviet Union and the guy in charge of this section of Berlin are kissing, and it's this sort of like forbidden romance between them. And this is a bit similar to like the Trump and Putin thing, where it's like, because Trump and Putin are, these secret gay lovers or whatever, and that's a bad thing. And also, that's not a homophobic remark to like make that connotation. It's like a lot of this art, especially like you say, to the Israeli superimposed on the German thing. I have like a couple different thoughts on that. Like that's a very interesting stance to take in terms of the Israeli flag ever being a connotation.
Because the point of that one apparently is it was painted to honor the 50th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. So when Nazi forces, they destroyed a lot of Jewish-owned buildings, shops, businesses, etc. But yeah, I don't know, Israeli flag over the German flag.
Because that's what I mean. Because it's like, well, because this was the symbol of communism basically crumbling and falling 2 years before it happens, and it really represents this. But how much longer, when you tie I guess that's what I'm sort of getting at, is if your community is inherently political, that changes with the winds of time, like pretty rapidly in terms of like Vienna is the number one city in the world, the cultural capital of Europe, whatever, pre-World War One. And then it just isn't. And then now no one cares about Austria in terms of global power. It just doesn't exist in that same way.
Portugal used to be.
Yeah.
I mean, Brazil was a Portuguese colony, and now people couldn't find Portugal on a map. Like 6 people live in Portugal.
Yeah. And then they'd say, well, why doesn't Spain just take them? I'm like, why doesn't Spain just take Portugal? But yeah, it's like this sort of like, okay, but then modern Russia, I would argue, resembles some weird mix of like more of like the Tsar meets, I don't know, even earlier than that. Like they're somewhat democratized, but now it's like an oligarchy like never before.
Democratized would be a strong word
yes,
to
decentralized.
describe Russia.
Decentralized, yes. But then it's like you take this art, and this is important, but it's one of those, I'm trying to think of another example of where we might have American art that means something. So let's say something based on 9/11 or Pearl Harbor or whatever. It makes sense, but it only makes sense to a degree, because then once you build up those layers of time and layers of history, those people don't have any connection to like the War of 1812. Like imagine doing political art about that, and it's like it doesn't have any resonance or relevance whatsoever because we're best friends with England now. Like period. Like so that's just a weird footnote. And so when it comes to, I guess where I would want this meal to be cut into and us trying to like dig out whatever chunks from this meal, it's like we inherently have a sense and a need for community among whatever. Even if it was a negative sense, we're driven to do it. Mm-hmm. There's an impulse to do it, but it's also almost anything good that's ever happened has been more than one person collaborating on anything. That's civilization. But then I guess, what do you feel, and not in a trademark classic, like giant question to lob onto you, but like, what do you feel?
This is the big question of the day.
Yes.
The treble shell gives me one big one I'm like, I don't know.
I just bake this pie and then just like throw it at you. There's not like right or wrong answer to this, but there's got to be better answers and worse answers of like, what is it safe or productive to base a community around? Like you get, like we were talking about earlier, Pakistan, that's forcibly making those people a community based on their religion. America and Brazil were geographically communities because it's like there's a lot of people here that 1,000 years ago wouldn't be mixing in this sort of way, but we've been thrown over here together, so now we stay over here together. And then you get a situation like this, like Germany and their national identity, even if nothing happened in Germany, which is like the understatement of the century. If the 20th century didn't happen, like, and Germany was just this weird coalition of old Holy Roman Empire states, what is like a safe thing to define a community by? Something that's like actually productive? Because like China has good pockets where like we've been doing this for 4,000 years. India has that. It just makes sense that this place would be this place and this community.
Even then, I'm not entirely sure it does completely make sense, because I mean there are parts of India that aren't. They don't believe that the central government is like valuing their area, like the area of Kashmir, for example. And similarly, with pretty much anywhere. I mean, and Germany is pretty similar, where it's just a bunch of different states that were kind of put together because of history.
Yeah.
But like they have very distinct cultures in a lot of ways. I mean, like Bavaria, people go to Bavaria for certain things because they think Bavarian culture is radically different than, say, the like Brandenburgian culture or something, right?
Right.
So like it's a hard thing, because I feel like a lot of if we're basing cultural communities just on like border lines, like they hardly ever make any sense,
right?
Because like a lot of the time those borderlines are arbitrary. Like even Pakistan, like making it this, saying that, oh well, it's all, you know, Muslims, so this is Pakistan. Even then, I mean, there are like 4 different areas of Pakistan that are radically different in terms of like how they live and what they believe. And like, for example, like the Kurds in a lot of those countries around the same area, like, I don't know. It's like, I don't know how you define that community.
Because like, yeah, like it's a weird, I don't want to say like we're getting better or worse at it, but a weird sort of, like as you were saying that, I was trying to think of like a counterexample of like, okay, well, what's the best country or group of people that feel like pretty cohesive and justified? And I don't think I would be able to argue anything beyond the 80s or whatever. Like, for example, what I'm getting at is like, maybe the British Isles are the closest thing to like, we are geographically separate, we speak this language, we all look this way to some degree in the, you know, historically speaking, not recently. But even then, it's like growing up listening to English music, a lot of English music, or British Isles music. I don't want to insult people who I'm about to quote here. Like the Smiths are very definitively from Manchester, which is not the same sound as London. Today, I feel that if you tried to like, well, my identity as an artist is this, I don't think it gets so specific to Manchester anymore because life is so connected via the internet and we can all travel easier. Whereas like Scottish culture, and even as far as the 80s, Scottish music would be very different than English music. Yeah. And so it's this weird, if we're all searching for this and everyone's clearly desperate for it, it's like something happens in politics and this doesn't represent the United States of America. This is not our spirit. And it's like, well, what is our spirit? What is our spirit? Because like, yeah, it's like, well, this doesn't happen. Because I think on some other dishes, we've talked about like Denmark or other like a bit more, not utopian European countries, but countries that are small enough and nimble enough to kind of do whatever they need to do. But even then, they have very like clear divisions that even in their art world is like, well, that's not us. This is us. And they're always in this eternal civil war. And so when you look at, I think maybe hip hop is the last thing that used to be East Coast, West Coast,
Los
Texas,
Angeles, New York.
Yeah. Like, when you're making, I guess that's the main point I'd be getting at with like this, is I feel that this is, to be a globalized world is better in my view to some degree, but not every degree. COVID happens to the degree it happens because we can get on a plane and get there in 30 seconds. I would say this open art, this is like the handshake of like old world to new world of 50 years ago. If this fell, it would just be German artists doing this kind of organically. But now it's this weird handshake of, if something happens in Syria, we're all in this together. And if something happens in, like you said, Jerusalem, we're all in this together. Yeah. And I feel that robs local artists and local cultures of their ability, I would argue, to exist.
Well, and I mean, you can see that, right? Like, you think of kind of the imperialism of capitalism, where you were talking earlier when you were in the Netherlands or you're in China, and it's just a shopping mall wherever you go. And I, like when I went to Berlin, I mean, so there are some things that are like, this is Berlin, this is Germany, or this is so European or whatever, but like it's also just very comfortable. There's the same day that I went to the East Side Gallery, I went to the Ramones Museum. There's nothing particularly Berlinian
I was about
the
to
Ramones.
Say, what does that make any sense whatsoever? Are they even Germanic in heritage?
I don't think I let me look up why there is a Ramones museum before we move on. But yeah, so like there's, I don't know, I feel like so much of a community is like created by this idea that we have to have a community, I think. And like generally we go back to we're animals, we're tribal people, and we have this very kind of deep-rooted need to have like an in crowd and an out crowd.
Yeah.
Like we almost naturally want to have common enemies. We almost naturally really want to have like that family unit. So America, quote unquote, Western culture is so individualist in this sense that like I feel like a big problem with part of the reason that America has become so kind of spread out and is kind of like tearing at the seams a little bit is because it's so individualist in the sense that like our community is generally just our family unit, right?
Yeah.
The mother, the father, and the 2 kids, and occasionally grandpa comes around, right?
Yeah.
But that's really not the same in a lot of places. Like they're far more that familial unit is far larger. The role of the community or the village, the town is so much larger, which like I think that changes a community. Like I think the unit of community is I think the only definition of community that really makes any sense in the end. Like country border communities, like an Indian community or a Brazilian community or an American community, I don't think that makes any sense in the end because you're like trying to distill something very, very diverse into like something too easy.
Yeah, I would say to your exact point, that's, I guess, where my biggest problem with like art in general would be, is that sort of imperialized, capitalized need to distill used to be like this like negative thing you'd look at in the 90s of like, don't try to like pour us all into one homogelated like puddle or whatever. Whereas now, like an example would be growing up in Colorado, Denver was very famously like awarded the Olympics and said, piss off. We don't want it. You're going to ruin the environment. We don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't think that happens today. I think that Denver is too many, and not even in a negative way. I'm saying there's too many Californians, Texans, people from Seattle, New York, Boston, everywhere that like the number isn't there to then say like, well, it was like that over there. And so I'm over here and I'm adapting to what this kind of is. But there's no like Denver community, national identity, because once it passed a certain threshold, I guess, of popularity or population or whatever. And so like you go all the way back to Lifafa. I think why you play that for some like country music fan or for some whatever, anyone who's like not jonesing to listen to like native Indian music. I think the reason why it resonates and like actually hits is because it's inherently like folk music.
Yeah.
And actually I would raise this point too, because not to cook this dish forever, but this was my big, I was and / am very notably like anti-folk music. I think folk music sucks and it's the worst thing ever made because at a certain point it just became the aesthetic. Like you have Neil Young and you have people in the 70s, 80s, and somewhat 90s. And folk music is like the best possible type of music because it's literally what the boots on the ground. This is what this specific person or community or group is feeling very tangibly.
Because the initial, I mean, like to go back even further than Neil Young, I mean, folk music is just like the people's tunes, basically.
Exactly.
Like from, slave songs to like local folk music of a place like, I don't care, China, Vietnam, Germany, anywhere.
Exactly.
It's like the people's tunes.
Exactly. And then I think that has faded out with globalization. And it's great that I can get a banana in December because of globalization, because they don't grow here. But like when you get around the time of like Mumford and Sons, it's like, okay, but this is like window office, like stockbroker, like whatever. And then we're
not dealing with folk anymore. We're just dealing with people who dress like they are living in the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly.
And make pop music.
Exactly. And so not even in a derogatory, like, I would never argue that I am being culturally appropriated as a straight white man in the United States. So by no means am I saying that, but I'm saying a lot of like the continued existence of so many different types of music or types of art is like this weird cultural appropriation where it's like there's a famous movie, Sullivan's Travels, where this director wants to become a homeless guy so that he can make a better movie about the homeless experience.
Gotcha.
Or like the poor, because it's during the Great Depression. And they're like, we don't want that because we experienced that. And not only do we not want that, you are not the authority to say that, Mr.
Totally.
Rich Hollywood guy.
Yeah.
And I feel that that's like most art. And so when you look at like the East Side Gallery here, I didn't look through every single one. I think it's great, and it's a great dish to bring to this conversation especially. But then there are certain ones with like, well, you know, give peace a chance and no borders and no walls and no war. And it's like, okay, yeah, here and in Poland and in Russia and in America and in London. It's like this is all getting a bit too... I feel that we're losing community and what's happening... we're losing culture and community at the same time. And what's happening is half of the people are like, good, because we want our rock music in Poland to sound like rock music in New York. Like the Ramones being in Berlin.
By the way, bassist D.D. Ramone grew up in Berlin.
Good enough,
And
I guess.
the city of Berlin is mentioned in numerous Ramone songs.
Including
Tenuous connection.
Blitzkrieg Bob, yes. But then it's like half of them are like, no, this is better this way. I want a McDonald's on every street corner because that makes the world closer and we're a global community. But then the other half, I think this is why maybe to some degree you get that nationalist rise now.
Totally.
Is that people are saying, okay, I am not represented by this. And I'm represented by the crappy gas station on the corner where the grandma and grandpa own that, but we all go drink there on Fridays. That's community, not the Fuddruckers or whatever that's up the street. And
Hey, don't you dare say anything about Fuddruckers.
I've never been in there. That's the only reason.
I've never been inside
yes,
Fuddruckers.
yes. But when it comes to like culture and community, because I often find myself in this trying to make a declarative statement of like, it's not just that I'm getting older. It's like things are starting to suck a little bit more. And is anyone else noticing this? And it's a weird, yeah, but who are you to say that? And who are you to say this or whatever? And it's like, I think that's why Leaf Alpha resonated so strongly with me. Of like, this sounds like the Indus River Valley civilization. This sounds like a specific guy in a specific place, not really like nationalistically saying it's so much better and not like leaning into like it's airport music that they'd play at the New Delhi International Airport. But then you get like calls for that, and it's hard to say. There used to be like Chicago rap used to be like Kanye and Common, and a lot of people, it's like, we're going to be the intellectuals a little bit, we're going to be a bit more introspective. I don't know that exists anymore other than virtually. I think it's like TikTok sounds like this, SoundCloud sounds like this, Twitter sounds like this, and I don't think that's productive. I don't think that's sustainable or healthy for actual human beings to build their culture and their art into online spaces.
It's so hard because I mean, like on the other hand, I mean there are people. So for example, like the small town that I grew up in, you know, if you're not a certain kind of person, you don't generally fit in. You don't really find your crew. You don't really find your community in a small high school with a 300 people or whatever. Like there were definitely quite a few people that like never found that community there. And I think online community is great for that. Like I feel like it's way easier to find your crowd now, but it doesn't really honestly seem to be doing people a hell of a lot of good. I mean, everybody's everybody's depressed and anxious and terrible. So
because I remember when we were in culinary high school, there was this like group. We didn't really have cliques that much in our high
It wasn't
school.
that clicky.
Yeah, it was like pretty, because there was no numbers to make it that
Yeah,
clicky. Yeah.
yeah.
But there was this group, I think there were seniors all the way to sophomores, but just this group of friends, and they would dress like punks from the 80s and 90s and like the Ramones fans and whatever.
Yep.
And they're out here in the farmland, like looking very different from everyone. I'm not in high school now, so I can't say, oh, that doesn't exist and no one's doing that. But even like when we were growing up, I'm not seeing a lot of like diversity, even in the cliches or stereotypes among teenage communities. And I think it's because they get so much of that fulfillment from online. So that's a good or bad thing. But I
Yeah.
just mean to say there's no like goth emo kids, hardcore jock kids that are just this. It's not as segregated in that way, which
Yeah.
I think is better and more healthy, but I don't know if it leads to like diverse art, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and I'm just wondering what it does from like a character's perspective and like a like an emotional perspective and emotional connection to people, because it's so like it's interesting in this globalized world and this internet world and everything that like kind of simultaneously we have like the least community we've ever had, because like everything is just a monolith, like everything applies to everyone at all times, and no matter where you're at, like everybody's seeing the same memes or whatever. But at the same time, that's almost the most community that anybody's ever had, because we are all experiencing the same thing together as one. And like I don't know. It's like it's just this weird double-edged sword, and I think like the fall of the Berlin Wall almost like metaphorically represents this. That like we're sort of crumbling these walls, like we're sort of coming together, but at the same time, the coming together has almost made us like feel farther apart. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say not specifically the Berlin Wall, but crumbling these walls. But some of those might be like support walls or load-bearing walls.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It might be like the roof might be, or the floor might be caving in a bit, and we're all sliding to the center of the exact same like thoughts on everything. But yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I agree.
Yeah. But yeah, community. Interesting topic that's constantly changing. Does that word mean anything? Is culture real? Is community real? What is left in this world?
But if you didn't like that for some reason, also on the menu this month, Japanese Breakfast put out Jubilee. The dreamy indie pop solo project of Michelle Zauner expands into more lush and dramatic territory, resulting in easily her best album yet.
Natalia Lafourcade, Un Canto por Mexico Volume 2. The best and brightest Mexican singer-songwriter continues her ode to her home country with a set of traditional songs and originals, all uniquely gorgeous.
Mdou Mokhtar put out Afrique Victim. Is that how victim?
It's French.
Yeah. A guitar god from Niger leads you through a very warm desert trek with his psychedelic take on Tinariwen-esque blues rock.
And Rochelle Jordan, Play with the Changes. This is ice cold and sexy as hell alt R&B for late night clubbing and any Android identity crises you might be having.
That's pretty good to be served alongside this meal as well. A lot of like good cultural dishes there.
Yeah, we got like many continents
Yes.
represented there.
A wide palette, yeah. Well, it's been great having everyone here. I think maybe we keep them around a bit longer though.
Let's go to the back.
Yeah, come on back to the kitchen.
Notes to the chefs. we asked you a lovely.
That's what this is.
That's what this segment's called. We asked you a question last month. we asked you what is a work of art that you maybe watched a lot as a child or was meant for children that has really held up over the years, and we got some fun answers.
Yeah. So what has remained meaningful as you've matured? Well, Evan from Colorado Springs said, "Hey Arnold," the television series on Nickelodeon. As a kid, I enjoyed it because it showed a different slice of life, a suburban kid seeing inner city kids. It's more matured, subdued, and more of an actual slice of life than modern cartoons.
And funnily enough, Megan from Canada also said, "I will say, Hey Arnold, because it still is fairly unique in the way it presented anxiety, friendship, imagination, and conflict. It's remarkably quiet for the time and demographic. I remember relating a lot to the characters in ways I couldn't with more frantic or adventurous plots." Yeah, that was one that I was never like that into as a kid, but having seen episodes since, I actually like it far more now.
Yeah, I would say that my love of jazz came from Hey Arnold. I was like, it's just a weird, like, bold choice to like, what if it's all jazz music? That's what kids in the 90s like. Yeah. Lauren from Cheyenne, Wyoming said, "Back to the Future." She said that she hadn't seen it in a while, and, you know, maybe it's not as good as she remembered as a child, but it's still very good, if not for some rough parts. But for the most part, it was good back then, and then still holds up today. I guess that's ironic or appropriate given the subject matter of the movie. Yeah.
And we've got Laura from South Africa who said, Avatar, The Last Airbender. Incredible stories and great characters who are multidimensional. They tackle really intense topics such as war, cultural oppression, freedom of speech, animal poaching, etc., while still being lighthearted and accessible for children. Watched it again last year. So good.
I have not seen that one, but I remember I had a cinematographer in film school who had like a full tattoo of that series, that show, and I was like, okay, this is like a legit work of art, apparently.
Oh yeah, it's pretty dang good. What would you say?
I had to think about this for a bit, both because when I was younger, I was watching more adult things, and then when I was older, now I watch things like Ponyo. But I would actually say Calvin and Hobbes. Because I had just come across online the strip from November 18th, 1990, and I had never seen something so outrageously like perfect for a 5-year-old, and also like so incredibly intellectual for like an 80-year-old. Like it really, I don't want to spoil it. Look it up, diners. It's a very like perfect.
November 18th, 1990.
Yes, Calvin and Hobbes, and it's just a perfect way of depicting children as being just little adults. Like they are little, you know, they just haven't experienced what you've experienced yet.
That's like, I've been going through a lot of my old things and getting rid of a lot of it. And a lot of those old things are books. And so I had quite a few Calvin and Hobbes collections that I just read repeatedly as a child. And yeah, rereading those, I'm like, this is so clever, because like around the same time period, like I liked Garfield, and that doesn't hold up, right? But Calvin and Hobbes, like they're so clever and so heartfelt and so just good.
Like multi-layered. It just never, it's like it completely works for you at 8 years old. It's just very novel. And then 18, it's like, oh, I'm about to go to college. I still feel this.
Totally.
And then, yeah, you just keep getting older, and it's like, oh, wow. It just, and for something written back then, too, to still remain timeless, it's, yeah, astounding.
It's very timeless, and there's like a lot of things from around that time period have maybe, how you say, like jokes that haven't aged very well in our current cultural sphere. But there's nothing in Calvin and Hobbes that I was like, oh.
Calvin's not criticizing NAFTA or George Bush Sr. But what about you? What did you think?
So I had a few different answers that I was thinking about, like. The easy answer, I feel like, is pretty much any Pixar movie. There's just so many different good ones. But honestly, in the same way that it's like because it hits me completely different. Something that I was just like really, really into as a child, and now I'm really, really into for different reasons are like, let's say the first 5 or 6 seasons of The Simpsons.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Where like I just remember relating to it in such a different way as a kid, because as a kid I was like, oh, you know, Bart Simpson is cool and this is funny and there's jokes and Homer's dumb. And like now watching it, it's like, oh my God, you know, it's like these family members trying to kind of wrestle with these like kind of hard situations they're put in. I think Lisa Simpson is like the best character on television in the 1990s.
Yep.
Like I relate to her so much more than I ever did as a child. And there are just like a large handful of episodes that are like cry worthy, just perfect.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like even just to narrow it down to one, like it's just a fun show and everyone feels like you're either Bart or Lisa when you're growing up and like eat my shorts or want to play saxophone, aspire for something. But like the Treehouse of Horror Halloween episode,
Okay.
I think from 1992, is like the fundamental foundation of like my theological and political beliefs on everything.
Which one is that one?
That there's because they break it into
'Cause
like
it's
3
yeah.
segments. Yeah. So the first one is that like Kang and Kudos, the aliens, the slobbering aliens, are dressing up as Bob Dole and
Bill-
Clinton,
Bill Clinton, yeah.
and they're like, "You have to vote for us. It's a 2-party system," and they're like, "They're right" or whatever. And then the other one is like Bart, like one of his teeth fall out, and then he puts it in this like petri dish thing, and then it grows a civilization in it.
Yeah. Like
And then I remember
the Twilight Zone episode.
Yep, exactly. And then just that moment where they're like, "That's not the devil, that's my sister," or whatever. They're like, "The devil is your sister?" And I was like, "Oh wow, that's actually like my little 8-year-old brain is like, oh wow, I need to read the Bible again because they're making a good point here. Like, how did Lucifer fall? Anyway, but yes, we love hearing from our diners. So for this month, we would like to ask you, what work or works of art have helped to provide a strong community for you?
So people often become very like strongly tied to a fan base or a community based around a band or a TV show or like baseball cards, whatever. But what is one that has given you that community, and how has that community changed you for the better?
You can write to us at aminordiner@gmail.com or leave us a comment or message on YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook.
Well, that's all the time that we have.
No, good meal, good month. Thank you very much for dining with us tonight. Be sure to thank your hostess, Miss Mandy Groves, on your way out tonight, and wave to Edward Tart on keys. A Minor Diner is recorded on location and produced by Epicene Motion Picture.
Oh my God, that's it! It's here, the snapping turtle.
Oh, yeah,
what
there.
the hell is that thing? That's a dinosaur.
Come on.
No, get it out of here.
No, it's fine.
It's
He's
not fine. That thing is massive.
Don't be mean.